to Isabella. And as we discussed outside, Sister Agnes is going to be sandwiched between two cardinals in pinstripes. Gal. There's so much to say about it in terms of political parallels, just in terms of the intricacy of it, the layers. I'm just curious how far all of you got into the script before you got, yes, I'm doing this.
I was inclined to say yes because Edward Berger, Ray Fiennes, and Isabella Rossellini included in the invitation, and Stanley Tucci. So it was fun to read, and all the more exciting to know, wow, they want me for it.
Right.
No, I didn't need much. I read the script. It was a page turner. Clearly, it was a wonderful role with a lot of interior life going on. You could see that was the potential of the part. With a great sort of moral journey. And Edward's work, I saw All Quiet on the Western Front. You can imagine the excitement that I would have watching that film, what he would do with this script. So it was a very easy choice.
Same thing for me. Same thing for me. And I was so happy to work with all of them. John and I and Stanley are very good friends, so that was fun. Shot in Rome, the city I was born and grew up. And Edward Berger. And it's true, the script was amazing. And that speech that you give at the beginning of the film, to me, was so moving, about talking about certitude and doubt. Then I read, the entire script was tinted by that speech, you know, and I think the film is about doubt, and that's why it's so moving, a celebration of doubt.
It's such a strong thing at the moment, too. You know, there is so much kind of absolute blowhard certainty out there that it's refreshing to see a movie that contemplates doubt so deeply. And I think we've said before earlier today that Rafe's character is the moral conscience of the film, and you are the eyes and ears, and you are the guilty conscience.
Or the lack of conscience. Yes, I also read I associated Edward with the Patrick Melrose television series that he'd done, and I knew Blythe Danner, who acted in that, and she adored Edward. So all those things inclined me to it.
Right. So how do you play doubt? It's such an interior performance, and those moments when you are backed by Judgment Day on the wall, there's such Sturm und Drang about that image, and it somehow humanizes you. It puts you into scale with this monolith that you're dealing with, and this whole kind of heavy is the head that wears the crown aspect of the character who doesn't want the responsibility of the conclave, doesn't want the responsibility of being a papal candidate. How do you play all that interior stuff?
Well, I'm sure, as you know, as actors, we often follow hunches and intuitions about things. People always say afterwards, what was your research? And often I'm following an instinct. When I read the script, I could feel that there was a wonderful interior journey. I think I related quite instinctively to the sense of duty, and also to the sense of wanting to, I think Lawrence says in the script, I thought I would have a life away from the Vatican, leading a more monastic life. And the script, Robert Harris and Peter Strawn give the character. I mean, Robert Harris has created the role, he's called Lomelli in the book. He gives him a very human dilemma we can all relate to. You're in a job, you have responsibilities, you would rather do something else. Then your boss, you go to your boss and you say, I would like to do something else, and your boss says, no, I want you here. And that's the last conversation that we understand Lawrence has had with the Pope. So he starts the film in a state of anguish. He's losing the boss, who fundamentally he loves, but the last conversation was very, very difficult. And now he's got to oversee the conclave. So he's got to be a bureaucrat, he's got to be an executive, and he's dealing with private grief and the sense that he hadn't resolved stuff with the Holy Father. So all those things I think are very relatable. And then of course the gift of the part is the speech about doubt. I think it is a great speech. I think it was. I know it's important to Robert Harris, and I know that was the reason Edward Berger was drawn to it, because it is a great proposition at the beginning of what is essentially a political thriller, but the men are dressed in red dresses. But it's the same as any political election. It's the same. Who is going to get the gig? But at the centre is a man who says we have to have doubt. I interpret doubt as sort of questioning is having humility. I don't know the answers, and I cannot insist on the answers. I have to say we all have to be asking questions. And of course, in such a structure like the Catholic Church, that can be quite incendiary, because the Catholic Church likes to think this is how it is, do not question. And so that proposition at the beginning of the film told me, given in Lawrence's head, it's something he makes spontaneously, it gives him a sort of, a kind of fire, philosophical fire, despite his quiet demeanour maybe. He has in him a sense of justice. So all those things kind of churned and osmosed in me, and then I just worked with wonderful, I mean, as you know, you act, you're reacting as much as you're acting. It's the eyes of the person you're looking at helps you play a scene. So all those things, and it emerges.
Well, a variation on that for you. I mean, Sister Agnes, that performance is incredible. You communicate more with your eyes than a lot of people do with pages and pages of dialogue. Not these actors, obviously. So how do you get there? How did you do it? Did you talk to nuns at all? Or?
No, I went to nun school. I grew up in Rome. I'm partially Swedish. I'm often here at the Scandinavian House. But I grew up in Rome and went to Catholic schools. And I'm going to say something that is a little strange, but it's true. The nuns that they had all of their personalities, but they were very committed. And when I asked one of them, how did your family felt when you said you wanted a nun? Oh, she said, my mother cried and cried. She said, why don't you go to church every day? I want to be a grandmother if you become a nun in Catholic school. In Catholics, priests and nuns cannot get married. I cannot become a grandmother, and that's devastating to me. Just be a religious, but don't be a nun. But she said, I had to be a nun because it was a calling. I couldn't help myself. And those are exactly the same words my mama said about acting. Incredible. She said, I didn't choose. She had 4 children, and in the 40s, in the 50s, and that was difficult for a woman with 4 children to have a career. She was scolded a lot. And she said, I cannot help myself. I have to act. I didn't choose acting. Acting chose me. It's a calling. So I saw this determination of these women choose the life they want to live. Even the nuns, although in a patriarchal society of the church, they have a role that it is not dominant. They can't vote, they can't be cardinal, they cannot be pope. But it is a calling. They live the life they want to live. So that's what I played. I played that determination.
I love it. I really adored how much we get the love that Sister Agnes has for these women, her protectiveness toward them. And I think that comes across beautifully. It's a performance of such economy, but so emotional. It's really beautiful. That character has such ambiguity about him, such shading. He's kind of a villain, and yet we feel devastated for him when everybody is applauding when they finally elect a pope, and he's sitting there completely crushed. How would you define him as a character, and how did you approach him?
Well, I think he's a victim of his own ambition. That's Tremblay's story, everybody in the College of Cardinals followed their calling. They're all celibate, they're all deeply committed, or at least that was what set them on this road that led them to this high, lofty position in the church. And at a certain point, probably incrementally, and had a lot to do with just his innate nature, as I say, Tremblay's ambition overtook him. And I'm sure it's somehow it's tied up in a complicated way with his own great desire to do good. Tremblay wants to be the Pope because he feels he can be a wonderful Pope and make a difference. But he, at a certain point, became strategic. It's very interesting in talking about the College of Cardinals, this combination of 100 men. They all, like any social organism, there are the saints and the sinners, there are the bureaucrats, the technocrats, there are people, there's a dean. I was kind of the chamberlain, closest thing to a sort of producing, a line producer. College of Cardinals, the business manager. I'm the one who took care of the bill, getting the bills paid, took care of that. He was very much an administrator. Lawrence's, he feels he has been made a manager. Well, Tremblay is like the business manager. It's given him access to all the mechanics of the Vatican. And of course, if you get that close to the tools and the levers of power, you can manipulate them. So I think he just sort of succumbed to the temptations of his own ambition. And he was definitely corrupt. I mean, he paid off people to vote for him. My own feeling is that, the other crime that he is accused of is bringing this young nun from Africa to shame Adeyemi. One thing that fascinates me about the character, I made my own decisions, but it's up to the audience as they follow their story, what decision they want to make. But I feel that some aspect of Tremblay was an innocent. I do believe that the Pope himself was a manipulator before he died. He was a chess player. That's the first thing you learn. Look at all the things he arranged to happen in case he died. One of those things that happened in my mind was getting rid of Adeyemi because he did not feel he was an appropriate candidate, and getting rid of Tremblay. Well, what better way to do that, if you're a genius chess player, is to use Tremblay, in fact, virtually blackmail him with the evidence you've gained about him, in order to get him to get rid of Adeyemi by inviting this woman up.
He wants to be innocent.
How does the villain feel about himself? In any case, the arc of his story, I know I'm going on too much about myself. He suffers the greatest humiliation. Just at the moment when he thought he was going to have his greatest triumph, he goes crashing down in the eyes of all of the men he's associated with. And yet he cannot leave. He has to stay in sequestration. He remains in prison. And I find that, no matter what you think of this man, a sort of heartbreaking and moving end to his story. We're not the only ones who get the line of
So I was fascinated with the reconstruction of the Sistine Chapel, the Casa Santa Marta. That whole environment is so real and detailed, and it impacts the tone of the scene, the atmosphere of every scene in the movie. So you have this sort of very formal, elegant look with all of this symmetrical structure and hard lines, And then you have this incredible mess of dirty politics and conspiracy and secrets and things. Clearly, the Vatican was never going to let you film that in Vatican City. So, tell us about the...
But not because of the films. I mean, you can't. The Sistine Chapel is Michelangelo. You want a crew of filmmakers.
But, you know, the shooting a reconstructed set of the Sistine Chapel at Cinecittà on the back lot there, how was that experience? And did you feel part of the environment?
I was very touched because Fellini was there, my father was there, De Sica, all the people that I grew
Were
up
you a
with.
kid at those, on those sets?
Yes, of course. But also what he created. This generation of filmmakers right after the war created incredible artisans. I mean, Italy's known for artisans, but they hired them to be in the film industry. And so, looking at, I wasn't in any of the scene of the Sistine Chapel, of course, the nuns were not allowed, but I went as a tourist to see, and I felt so proud, and also felt so proud of the people that I've known as a little girl, that left that legacy, that left that tradition of incredible artisans.
It was amazing to feel, although we were on a set, it was such a persuasive replica. And when we all sat down in our robes and we did all the, and Edward was he really wanted, as you can see from the film, the first scene of voting is done in great detail. And the atmosphere shifted, it became something other. Around us was Cinecittà, that we were in the Sistine Chapel. And there was this extraordinary, and the same with the scene when I give the speech about Dad. Again, that atmosphere, some beautiful music playing, choral singing, which completely made everyone just sit differently as they listened to the music. And it is a weird thing, whether you're an atheist or not, or a different religion, you go into a church. I'm not practicing anything. I was a Catholic, as my mum was a committed Catholic, and I rebelled against it was sort of mandatory for me to attend Mass until I told my mother when I was 13.
Were you an altar boy?
I was briefly. Actually, yeah, but this was in Ireland, where at that time in the early 70s, the Catholic Church was very unforgiving strong presence in the lives of everyone. And but I've never lost a real curiosity about what it means to have a faith. And if I'm in, for instance, Italy, which I go to Italy quite frequently, in fact, I will go into a church, and I will, the atmosphere of tranquility that you can find in a church, I don't think you can deny it. And I know atheists who go into churches and they feel this thing. So it is what the act of faith does, and it's led to these extraordinary structures being built by all religions everywhere, carving statues, celebrations, paintings, tapestries. It does something, and we look in awe, even if you're not a believer, you can look in awe at what faith created the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Faith has made some of these great music, like the Matthew Passion. So you can't, Jonathan Miller, the English director, medical doctor, I think he did a BAM, he staged a version of the Matthew Passion. I didn't know him very well. I met him after. He said, I'm not a believer. I don't believe. But I really think this is an important piece of music. I thought that was quite funny. He was stressing his lack of belief, but he wanted us to hear the Matthew Passion.
Well, it was an extraordinary experience. Both the really thrilling one, the setting for the great speech that we've been talking about, the doubt speech. It was one of the very early scenes we shot. It was at the Palazzo Belvedere or whatever it was. It was one of the great national museums of Rome.
Oh, Palazzo
Barberini Palace. And we were in this huge, great hall with an extraordinary ceiling, which you see in the film. But the museum, the galleries were closed off for the day for us to work in this one huge hall. But I asked, one of the guards there if I could just sort of sneak into the galleries. I'm here, why not? I'm the only one who did this. I walked through these galleries. There was the famous Vicar's Daughter, the Raphael painting. I was in a room all by myself with all these Caravaggios and Bellinis. And I mean, you asked if I felt the spirit on this film. That's when I felt it most intensely. I mean, there we were in Rome at the very font of the Catholic Church and the art inspired by the Catholic Church. You just couldn't help just feel a part of it. The other thing that's extraordinary about this film, the College of Cardinals is extraordinarily diverse. It's an international group. Edward, working with Nina Gold and Martin Ware, the casting directors, it's a masterpiece of casting. They went the major roles and even the minor roles, but noticeable roles. They're played by the best actors in about 35 different countries. We have Jacek Kollmann from Poland, who plays Wozniak, Thomas Leupel from Germany, Mira Ninizi plays Sabadine. These are small parts. Every one of them is indelible. Brino Byrne.
Brino Byrne is a fantastic actor. I haven't
Yeah,
seen him in movies for 100 years.
And not
so good.
to mention Sergio.
Sergio Castellito, the vaping.
Yeah. You talk about feeling the atmosphere. It was just, we had this extraordinary first table read, really the only time we read the script, start to finish, when we had just barely gotten to know each other. These are almost entirely theater actors, and we just roared into it and played it full out, and you really did already get a sense of the sweep of this film. That was the quality of the actors we were working with. It's just a thrilling experience for that reason. And Rafe was a partner to each one of us. He's the only one who was in every single scene.
And the movie is so built around a series of two character confrontations. So it could very easily, I don't mean this in a diminishing way at all, it could very easily be a play. Right? You know,
But you know, I'm saying that because when I read the book, when I saw the film, when I read the book, my fantasy, I know I'm Roman, when I saw the film, there was all this dimension of Rome, of the church, of the architecture, of the costume. And when I read the book, my fantasy didn't bring me as far as Edward brought me. I admired his ability to quote paintings. You know, it was reminiscent of all our history of art.
It does create a very immersive world with the movie. So, you know, it's an amazing ensemble. Stanley Tucci, I think we didn't mention also, but these two character scenes are so powerful. The one you have with John, where you confront him about what you've heard about the final meeting with Pope. I mean, the one you have with Luciano Masmati, yes, as Adeyemi. Incredible, that moment where you step forward and say, no, there's no hope. It's so, it's quite intimidating, and you feel the torment of this man who's telling himself, be a manager, you're a manager, be a manager. And, you know, obviously not enjoying any of this stuff, which is destroying people's chances at the big job. And, I mean, I felt like all of those scenes were so weighted, so powerful. I mean, the scene with Sister Agnes is incredible. That face-off about, would you step outside? I mean, I thought blows were going to be landed. But do any of you have a favorite of those two character scenes?
Well, I don't have a favorite, but I remember when Edward said my last face-off with John, and the camera just moves in. There's no cutaway.
Yeah.
And of course, he didn't tell us this, so you know how it is. You start a scene and you think, well, the camera's over there. And you kind of warm up. And then the camera's suddenly Edward was going, no, guys, I think it's just going to be this angle. Oh, right. we know it was, that was it. And I love the courage of Edward to go, I love that in the director when they go, no, it's just this. Yeah. And it was the same on the first day. My first scene in the schedule was with Brian, and it's a big wide shot, and it's the moment when he's heard what Benitez's situation is, and he comes up and he says he's been voted in as Pope, and Brian's character comes up and says, we have to talk. And it was tiny. It's a huge. It was shot in, what's the big palace outside Naples? The big Caserta. We went down to this huge big palace, Caserta, which is not far from Naples, and that adds to the Vatican atmosphere. But in our first scene, we were tiny. And again,
all of those scenes outside, I think, are one before the sequestration happens, and those scenes out in the courtyard, and the shot of the pile of cigarette butts is so expressive. So much great stuff.
Can I add there's something in my mind? Because Italy also, there's such a history, and a past life, and you're just here for a moment. We were just talking about Palazzo Barberini, where the wonderful speech that you give. Palazzo Barberini, of course, it's a palace where it was built, 400 years ago, and he had stables for horses. But then in the beginning of the century, you don't have horses, you have cars. That became a cinema. My grandfather built it as a cinema. My grandfather was an architect. Yes, the Cinema Barberini is still working, and it's my grandfather that did it, and that's how my father became a filmmaker, because his father gave him a pass, and he could go to the cinema, and so all the silent movies, and that's what inspired my father to become a filmmaker. And then now we're shooting this beautiful film with that beautiful speech. It's like a Palazzo Barberini. The magic of Italy. There's this history, the lives after lives after lives.
If I could just jump in and add to that, what an incredible year that we see you in La Chimera, where you were playing another aspect of Italian history, and in this role completely different. Just wonderful work in both films. We can't not speak about the political resonance of the film. Opening right after the election here, a very contentious fight, and so many of the things that we've seen in the news cycle, the hostility between the progressives and the reactionary conservatives, the corruption of power, I think particularly the demonization of the other, which we've seen recently about immigrants, and in this case it's Muslims that comes through in Sergio Castellito's fantastic screed, which I love the way he just jumps in. That bomb is an opportunity for him. Like, let me milk this for my own means. So, how aware were you of all that, and it's the parallels of what was going on in the world, America in particular? Was that a consideration, or did that come later?
Well, we shot it a year and a half ago. And needless to say, an awful lot has happened. It is, we all knew from the very first we read the script, this is a movie where it is the triumph of progressivism. That's the happy ending of the film. And I think we all did the film in that spirit. It was quite clear who the good guys and the bad guys were, not to be too reductionist, being one of the bad guys. But we just simply thought, well, we're following the heroic paradigm. We're going to give people lots of thoughts, and we're going to give them a very happy ending, a happy, sort of uplifting, liberal ending.
You said earlier, John, that there's a comfort to it.
Well, yes, but this is for me, and I think for probably a lot of people in this room, this is a very, very melancholy time, a time of a general feeling of defeat for progressivism. But I think it's extremely important that this movie tells its story with this great resonant ending. I think it's going to draw a lot of people. It's going to be important.
say that the themes of the political landscape of the film has been with us, I think, for some time. And I think I felt that the kind of spectrum of positioning, you mentioned Sergio Castellito's essentially racist speech, and his lack of tolerance, certainly. That is a very current thing, has been for some time, so I think I wasn't particularly aware of the upcoming US election as a background to our film. I just think the themes of progressivism against retrenchment into sort of orthodoxy and conservatism and nationalism, those things are been with us for some time and growing in intensity. But I echo John's sentiment that I think we thought, well, here's a film, it's not cynical about the church. There are human beings in the position who are flawed and confused or very ambitious, but who is the guy who's going to get the gig? And who is that person? And I always felt, whatever his personal situation, he speaks, and when he speaks with wisdom and the kind of spiritual integrity that you would hope would be within the heart of the person who would be running the Catholic Church.
Isabella, do you want to?
Well, when I read the script, and I read the ending, I had to read it 3 or 4 times. I even called my agent and said, am I understanding it correctly? Because English is not my first language. But I think I'm moved by the film because it ends again on a doubt. And I think that the answer, first of all, they got the name innocence. Doubt and innocence is a virtue. And he says, well, I am who God made me. And he really ends on a note that is an appeal to tolerance, because we don't have all the answers. And that's what moved me about the film most.
I think Benitez is such a great character. That actor is an incredible discovery. He has such a sweetness about him and such a self-possession that is never arrogant in any way. It's just, there's something pure about him. So in a sense, in this film about very flawed men, good men but flawed, there is this...
Except for John Lithgow.
There is this incredible...
Somebody not pay the bill?
It should be said that that was the product of a 6 or 8 month search finding Carlos.
Yeah.
I mean, Nina Golden Company scoured the world. Brazilian drag queens, action bands, performers. It was, I think, Carlos himself, who is fairly new to acting. He's in his early 50s, who is an architect from Vancouver, and he's only just begun acting. And he submitted a reel, and they took an interest. He took a couple of trips to England, first to meet with Nina, then to meet with Edward. He did lots of tests, and he is very, very new to the process. And part of that is gorgeous innocence in the film. I think emerges from that. He's also a completely wonderful human being. You can just tell. What a debut.
I think the treatment of the intersex character is so delicate and respectful. It gives the movie a kind of grace, and I love that it ends on a note of hope, which we really need right now. But anyway.
And a little bit of laughter. Those young girls walking out of that door,
Yes.
just laughing gaily together. That is such a hopeful way for it to end. I thought that was brilliant. Right?
Even the tortoise back in the pond, there's something very beautiful about the one. The way you take that tortoise outside, it's just such a nice sign off to that character. Anyway, this has been such a pleasure.